All right, hey everyone, and welcome back. We are diving into some serious power struggles today. We're going to be looking at redistricting battles that are going down in 10 states. And these are states where things are getting kind of crazy. We've got Louisiana, New York, North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, New Mexico, and Utah. And get this, we're talking about a handful of seats that could decide which party controls the entire House.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. The margins are super tight this time around. And what's interesting is how different these battles are playing out. I mean, in some states, it's like a win for minority representation, right?
Yeah.
But in others, it's all accusations of gerrymandering. It gets messy. It really shows you how complicated redistricting is. I mean, just trying to redraw those voting district boundaries.
Yeah, it's like a political chess game. One wrong move and bam, the whole board changes. So let's jump right in. Let's start with Louisiana. I was reading about this big court fight they had over representation for black voters.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. So Louisiana has a pretty large black population, but for years they only had one black majority district out of 6 total. Naturally, people started asking if the map was, diluting the power of black voters, maybe even violating the Voting Rights Act.
Right, right. And speaking of that act, what is it exactly? How does it apply here?
Well, the Voting Rights Act, it was passed way back in 1965. Basically, it protects the voting rights of racial minorities, especially in places with, well, a history of discrimination. So you can't draw district lines in a way that weakens the voting power of minority groups.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying. So back to Louisiana. Did the courts end up siding with the people who were challenging the map?
They did. A judge ruled that the map was probably violating the Voting Rights Act, and he ordered the state to redraw it. They ended up making a second black majority district, which was a big win for, well, everyone fighting for fair representation.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm guessing this change had some, let's say, political fallout.
Oh, for sure. This new district, it puts Republican Representative Garrett Graves' seat at risk. And it could mean Louisiana having 2 black U.S. House members for the first time ever.
Wow, it's a lot.
It's a major change for Louisiana politics, that's for sure.
Speaking of shifts, let's move on to New York. Remember how Republicans flipped those 4 seats in the 2022 midterms? Well, then there was that court case, right?
Yeah.
The one that might have messed up those wins.
Ah, the New York saga. That was a wild ride. First, the state's top court threw out the map, said it was gerrymandered, unconstitutionally in favor of the Democrats. And that opened the door for Republicans to maybe snag even more seats.
So what did the Democrats do? Just take the L?
Oh, no, they fought back. It was back and forth between the courts and the legislature. In the end, Democrats gave in a little, made some strategic choices, The final map does make one Republican seat a little shaky, but overall, they dodged a huge power shift.
It sounds like New York is still going to be a key battleground in the election.
100%. Both Democrats and Republicans see potential there. It's going to be a fierce fight for those House seats.
Well, buckle up, folks.
Now let's head down south, North Carolina. Things got a little heated, let's just say.
Heated might be an understatement. From what I've heard, they had supermajorities, court rulings getting overturned, and even accusations of discrimination. What in the world happened in North Carolina?
Ah, North Carolina. It's a perfect example of what we call partisan gerrymandering.
Ah,
Basically, the party in power they get to manipulate those district lines to, well, give themselves an advantage.
so how does that work exactly? I mean, what does gerrymandering look like in action?
Imagine a map, right? And the lines are drawn to cram your opponent's voters into just a few districts, while your own voters are spread out nicely across lots of districts. Even if you don't have the majority of votes overall, you can still win more seats. That's pretty much what went down in North Carolina.
So how did Republicans use this to their advantage?
Well, the legislature there, it's controlled by Republicans, and they have a supermajority, so they had a lot of power. They redrew the map in a way that, well, really helped their party. They basically packed Democratic voters into a few districts, making it almost impossible for them to win.
Yeah, I read that 3 Democratic representatives decided not to run again because of this. That says a lot about the power of redistricting, doesn't it?
For sure, it's not just about lines on a map, right? It's about who gets to represent us, who gets a voice, and it gets even more complicated. The state Supreme Court, they used to rule against this kind of gerrymandering, but now they have a Republican majority and they overturned that old ruling. So this new, more partisan map, it's good to go.
Wow, that's quite a turnaround for the Democrats.
Yeah, but the story isn't over. There's still a lawsuit going on saying that this new map discriminates against minority voters.
Oh, wow.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Definitely. Now, Alabama had a massive showdown over redistricting, right? The case even went to the Supreme Court. What was at stake there?
Alabama's case is similar to Louisiana's. They also have a large black population, but only one black majority district out of 7. So a lawsuit was filed saying that this violated the Voting Rights Act because it didn't give black voters enough representation.
And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. What happened?
The Supreme Court actually upheld the lower court's ruling. They said, yes, Alabama needs a second black majority district, a big win for voting rights, and a reminder that you can't just draw maps to silence certain groups.
It's interesting that 2 conservative justices sided with the liberal judges on
Yeah,
this.
it's a big deal.
What are the implications of that ruling, do you think?
Well, it sets a precedent, right? For other states where minority representation is being fought for, we're already seeing its impact in places like Louisiana and Georgia. There are cases going on there, too, all about making sure black voters have fair representation.
It sounds like Alabama really set the stage for a wave of battles in the South. Speaking of which, Georgia's another interesting case. They were ordered to create a new black majority district. But Republicans still managed to keep their advantage.
Yeah, they had to get creative with that map. They did create the new district like they were told, but they also redrew the lines in a way that shifted Democrat Lucy McBath's district, made it more favorable for Republicans, you see.
So they followed the rules, but still played the game.
Pretty much. And of course, there's another lawsuit questioning if the map is even constitutional.
Right. It seems like there are a lot of moving parts in these cases.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about Florida for a minute. Governor Ron DeSantis has been really involved in their redistricting process.
Oh, yeah, that one's been pretty controversial.
What happened there?
Well, DeSantis really wanted a specific map, and that map ended up dismantling a black majority district. As you can imagine, it caused a lot of backlash and lawsuits.
What's the latest on that legal battle?
It's been a roller coaster, that's for sure. First, a judge said DeSantis' map violated the state constitution. But then an appeals court overturned that ruling, so his map was back in play. Now it's up to the Florida Supreme Court. And, get this, most of the justices there were appointed by DeSantis.
Oh, no.
It seems likely that his map will win in the end.
Before we move on, I'm curious. Why is the Florida Constitution so specific about protecting minority voting rights?
That's a great question. Florida has let's just say, a complicated history with voting rights. There have been many attempts to disenfranchise minority voters there, so these protections were put in place to prevent that from happening again. It's a good reminder that redistricting isn't just about numbers and lines. It's about fairness, equality, and justice.
Absolutely. Okay, we've covered quite a few states, but we still have Kentucky, South Carolina, New Mexico, and Utah.
Right.
What were some of the highlights in those states?
Well, in Kentucky, the legislature is controlled by Republicans, and they moved the capital city, Frankfort, into a different district. A clever way to solidify their control over that seat.
Interesting. What about the other states?
Well, South Carolina had a case that went to the Supreme Court. It was about an alleged racial gerrymander in one of their districts. New Mexico's Democrats successfully defended their map against Republican challenges. And in Utah, there's a legal battle over whether the state Supreme Court can even overrule the legislature's map.
Wow. Every state has its own drama.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's amazing how redistricting plays out on so many levels,
From local courts to the Supreme Court.
and all with huge consequences for the U.S. House.
Absolutely.
Even small changes can shift the balance of power.
That's the thing about redistricting. It's all connected.
Well, we've covered a lot today, but I'm sure there's more to come.
Oh, definitely.
These battles are far from over, and the results will have a big impact on the upcoming election.
For sure.
But for now, let's take a quick break. We'll be back soon to discuss the bigger implications of all this and what it means for the future of the U.S. House. Stay tuned. We're back and ready to really get into the nitty-gritty of these redistricting battles. It's crazy how these local fights could actually determine who controls the entire House, right? Oh, absolutely. I mean, every district, every little line on the map, it all adds up to this big picture. It's not just about which party wins, you know? It's about whose voices get heard, whose concerns matter when it comes to making laws. It's about whose vision for America, well, gets to be the one that's actually put into action.
That's a really good point. It seems like so many of these cases end up in court.
Right.
Is it always this much of a legal battle?
Redistricting is tough. It's where law and politics and, just people and where they live all come together. It's bound to be messy, especially in a country that's, well, as divided as ours. Courts have a tough job. They have to make sure the maps are fair and that they follow the Constitution. And, of course, the Voting Rights Act. Right. That act has been a big part of a lot of these cases, especially in states where black voters haven't always been treated fairly.
Oh, yeah. The Voting Rights Act, passed back in 65, was huge. I mean, it was a landmark piece of legislation. The goal was to make sure racial minorities could vote without problems and that their votes actually counted. We saw how important it is in the Alabama case, remember. It helped challenge a map that wasn't giving black voters fair representation.
It's amazing that a law from 60 years ago is still so relevant today.
I know,
It
right?
really shows you how important these issues of racial justice are in our political system.
Absolutely. And the fight for voting rights, it never really ends, does it? Every generation faces new challenges. We have to keep fighting to protect this right for everyone.
That's so true. We've been talking about lawsuits and politics, but what about the average person? Why should they care about all this? Especially if it doesn't seem like it affects them directly.
That's a great question. Because at the end of the day, redistricting is all about representation. It's about making sure everyone has an equal say in how our country is run. When you have gerrymandering, whether it's to help one party or to keep certain groups from having power, well, that messes up fair elections.
So it's not just about lines on a map.
Nope. It's about the health of our democracy, really.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
These battles decide who gets to shape the policies that affect us all. Healthcare, education, the economy, everything. If representation is off, then the government's priorities are probably off too.
That makes a lot of sense. It makes these redistricting fights seem a lot more important. So if someone wants to get involved, what can they do?
First things first, stay informed. You got to follow what's happening in your state, understand the maps they're proposing, and know who's running for office in your district.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. Once you're in the know, you can start taking action. Contact your state legislators, go to public hearings, speak your mind. You can also support organizations that are fighting for fair elections and voting rights.
So it's about turning what you know into action.
Yep. Taking those small steps to protect our democracy.
I like that.
Every voice matters, and when we all demand fairness, we create a better system for everyone.
So looking back at all the states we've talked about, what are some of the bigger trends you've noticed?
One thing is for sure, both parties have gotten really good at this whole redistricting thing. They're using all the tools, data, technology, lawyers to try and get the upper hand.
Sounds like a political arms race.
Pretty much. And the prize is huge. Control of the House, the ability to pass laws, the whole shebang.
So where do you see all this heading in the future? Will it always be this complicated and controversial?
Good question. Some people are pushing for reforms, like maybe we should have independent commissions draw the maps so politicians don't have so much control. Others think the courts are the best way to stop extreme gerrymandering.
It sounds like finding a solution is going to be tough.
It is. But if we want our democracy to work, we got to figure it out.
You know, it's easy to get lost in all the legal stuff and political strategies,
Right.
but at the end of the day, this is all about people.
Exactly. It's about making sure every citizen has a voice, that every community is represented. Our government should reflect how diverse and dynamic our country is.
I couldn't agree more. Out of all the states we've discussed, is there one that stands out to you?
That's a tough one. Each state has its own challenges and quirks. But if I had to pick one, I'd say North Carolina is really interesting.
What makes North Carolina so unique?
Okay. It's like a perfect example of the kind of partisan battles happening everywhere. The Republican supermajority, the court decisions getting flipped, the accusations of discrimination. It's like a mini version of the bigger fight we're having about representation and the future of our democracy.
It's a reminder that these fights are far from over.
Yep.
And what happens in North Carolina or any of these key states could have a domino effect across the country.
Absolutely. It shows us how important it is to be involved, to challenge things in court, to push for reforms, to make sure our voices are heard.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
but this conversation is far from over.
Oh, for sure.
Redistricting is an ongoing process.
It is.
And as long as the stakes are this high, these battles will probably keep happening.
Definitely.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to remember?
Redistricting matters plain and simple. It shapes our democracy, who gets to represent us, whose interests are put first. It's complicated, it's messy, but it's something we all need to pay attention to. We have to be committed to fairness and equality in this process.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll be back for the final part of our redistricting deep dive. We'll explore some potential solutions and what the future might hold for this ever-changing landscape. Stick with us. Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. We've really gone through the ringer with these redistricting battles, legal fights, political games, the impact on representation. It's a lot. So now let's talk solutions. What can we actually do to make this whole process fairer and less, well, crazy?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
One idea that's been floating around is independent redistricting commissions. Basically, you take the power away from the politicians, right? Because let's face it, they have a big incentive to rig the system in their favor.
That makes sense. But how would these commissions actually work? Who would choose the members? And how do you make sure they're really impartial, not secretly playing for one side or the other?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. The ideal situation is you have a commission full of experts, people who understand demographics, geography, the law, the whole nine yards. But they can't be connected to any political party. How you choose these people is really important, and it's different in every state. Some states use a lottery system from a pool of qualified applicants. Others have legislative leaders or judges appoint the members.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really. Even with the best intentions, it's tough to make a truly independent commission. There's always a chance that politics will sneak in, whether it's during the selection process or when they're actually drawing the maps.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is. And we've seen mixed results so far in states that have tried this. Some commissions have done a great job, created much fairer maps, but others have been accused of being biased, of favoring one party over the other.
So what else can we do? I've heard some people say we should use algorithms or even AI to draw the districts. Is that a realistic solution?
It's definitely something people are looking into. The idea is that algorithms, they don't have human biases. They could create maps that are based on specific rules, like making sure districts are compact and have equal populations.
Sounds like a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Could this be the way to get rid of all the partisan fighting?
Well, it's not that simple. Algorithms are only as good as the information they're given, right? And someone still has to set the rules for how they work. We still need humans to make sure the maps are fair, that they represent actual communities, and that they don't accidentally hurt certain groups.
So technology can help, but it's not a magic bullet.
That's right. We still need human judgment and ethical considerations to guide the whole process.
It all comes back to us.
In a way, yeah.
I guess the biggest problem is the partisanship itself. As long as winning elections is the most important thing, redistricting is always going to be a battlefield.
I think you're right.
It's kind of depressing, honestly.
I know what you mean.
But looking ahead, what do you think will happen with redistricting? Will these fights just keep getting worse?
Well, I think it's safe to say redistricting is going to stay a hot topic. The stakes are just too high, and both parties are too determined to win.
So are we stuck in this cycle of lawsuits and gridlock forever?
I don't think so. I think there's hope for progress, but there are also dangers. The good news is more people are starting to understand how important redistricting is. And we have better technology and data analysis now, which could lead to more innovative and transparent ways to draw maps.
So you're saying there's a chance for a better, less divisive system?
There's always a chance. But it's going to take a lot of work. Citizens, lawmakers, the courts, everyone needs to push for reforms. We have to hold our leaders accountable and make sure that representation is fair for everyone.
We all have a part to play.
Exactly. We can't just sit around and hope someone else fixes it. We have to stay informed, get involved, and fight for a system that truly represents the people.
I like that.
It's our democracy, after all. Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
Redistricting might seem like a technical thing, all about maps and lines, but it's really about power. And in a democracy, that power should belong to the people.
I couldn't agree more. We, the citizens, have a right to demand fair maps, to hold our elected officials accountable, to make sure our democracy actually reflects our values. The future of redistricting and the future of our country depends on it.
That's a powerful message. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of redistricting. We hope you've learned something new and that you're inspired to get involved. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.